looking over a lot of boxing videos, various videos from different fight eras, different analysis, and so on. And I've just come across the now infamous video where Floyd Mayweather is in his car and he's being interviewed about his legacy. This was before the Pacquiao fight. I don't know the exact time, but it wasn't so long ago. Anyway, he made the now infamous remark that he believes he's better than Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Robinson. Um, his tagline is the best ever, TBE, the best ever. Um, I think any honest academic boxing observer would have to say that Floyd Mayweather is a great, great fighter. I think no one can take that away from him. He's 48-0 and he's beaten a lot of Hall of Famers, and his defense is impregnable. So it's very difficult to say that Floyd Mayweather doesn't deserve to be considered an all-time great. But just how great is open for debate. What I want to focus on, though, is not so much Floyd Mayweather. There'll be other videos for that. He's not retired yet, and I don't think you could really, truly judge a boxer just like a politician until he or she is retired. But I want to talk about the man that he mentioned, Muhammad Ali. Now, I'm someone who's followed boxing for a very long time, and if you're a boxing fan, you can't ignore Muhammad Ali because he's widely regarded as the greatest heavyweight ever. Many people think he's the greatest boxer ever. Although most academics would put Sugar Ray Robinson and possibly Henry Armstrong, possibly Joe Louis, possibly Willie Pep above Ali. That's a matter of debate. Some will put Ali second, some put Ali first, but he's not universally put at number one. And Ali himself said that Sugar Ray Robinson was the greatest ever, whereas he was the greatest heavyweight. But I want to talk a bit about Muhammad Ali because something I notice as an observer of boxing and someone who's a fan is there's this strange concept that Muhammad Ali is somehow in his protected bubble, whereby if you criticize him in any way, shape, or form, then there's something wrong with you. Now, regarding Floyd Mayweather's position, yes, it's arrogant, but people are forgetting one important aspect here. Muhammad Ali was arrogant. Now, people say, well, he backed it up. You could make the same argument for Floyd Mayweather. He's arrogant, but he backs it up. He wins fights. I don't actually see that much difference in terms of their attitude to the sport, in terms of their attitude, how they go about things. Now, Ali was a lot more political than Floyd, um, and the sort of money he made wasn't comparable. Floyd's probably, even in per capita terms, Floyd has made more than any boxer in history. But actually, in terms of the arrogance, I don't see a great deal of difference. In terms of how they approach it, Ali was incredibly brash, incredibly self-confident. And the truth is, a lot of fighters are. It's the nature of the sport that when you have a competitive sport, you're going to have some fighters who are generally boxers can be divided into two camps. Those who are arrogant and brash and full of themselves, and those who are a lot more humble and they don't like to speak up. Sometimes they cross over. I mean, take Mike Tyson, for example. He's been both humble and at times brash. When he was a young kid and he was, knocking guys out in the street, he was quite arrogant and quite brash. But in his later years, he's been pretty humble and, he's reluctant to rank himself highly. I don't know what Mayweather's response is going to be in years to come. But anyway, I want to focus on Ali because I find that when it comes to Muhammad Ali, anyone who shows a dissenting view is shouted down and considered to be a freak and considered to be full of shit and so on. Well, I want to be as objective as possible here. I've watched a lot of Ali fights. I've watched documentaries. I've read countless articles, books, etc., films. Um, so I think it's fair to say I've got a pretty decent knowledge of Muhammad Ali. And one thing I just cannot accept is he is this godlike figure who somehow is above criticism. My position here is not necessarily about how great he is as a fighter, because I think he fully deserves his accolades. He's beat some of the greatest fighters to ever enter a ring. He beat George Foreman. He beat Joe Frazier. He also lost several fights. Let's not forget that, although it was in his later years. The But let's not forget Joe Frazier won the fight of the century in '71. So, Ali was also beaten at his peak. Um, he was floored by Henry Cooper. He won the fight, but as a boxer, I don't think you could say that Ali was absolutely flawless. Even in his peak, he was beautiful in terms of movement, in terms of athleticism, and he was an incredible figure. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Pretty much held true to Ali, but let's not pretend he was absolutely perfect in terms of his delivery because he wasn't. I don't think you could really say that about any fighter. I mean, even Sugar Ray Robinson lost fights. So I don't think you could say any fighter is absolutely perfect in terms of his delivery. Ali as a person, this is something I want to focus on because it is generally I try to avoid that with fighters, but in the case of Ali, there is this sort of what I would describe as a personality cult, something akin to what you see in single party dictatorships, whereby it's forbidden to criticize the leader. Now, in the boxing world, there is something like this around Muhammad Ali, and frankly, it pisses me off. I'm the sort of guy who, when I make videos, I don't make videos to make myself popular. If people agree with me, that's great. But I don't say things just to please people. And if it means saying something that is unpopular, or I'm going to be ridiculed or told I'm stupid, so be it. I'm someone who's candid. I speak my mind. I don't try to offend people, but at the same time, I don't try to be politically correct and just try to say what people want to hear. So with Muhammad Ali, I'm going to break this down the things that I dislike about him. And this is not trying to be taste this. I know he's in an unfortunate situation right now health wise, so it's not trying to be crude or attack a man who's struggling. That is not the issue here, because I would be saying exactly the same thing if he wasn't suffering from Parkinson's. This is something that's unfortunate that happened to him. I think it's because he fought too long. But there's other fighters out there who have also suffered health-wise. I mean, look at Gerald McClellan. Look at in Britain, Michael Watson. There's other fighters who have suffered in that way. So I don't think you could say, oh well, let's not criticize Ali because he's in an unfortunate position. So my human perspective, yeah, it's sad to see what has happened to him. It's sad to see what's happened to a great fighter. Although I've also seen family members say he doesn't want sympathy, and I can believe that, and that's to be admired. So let's just take away that emotional aspect for a second, and let's just try and think objectively, just as a person, just as he was when he was a great fighter. So let's just take away the emotional aspect of how he is now. I want to break this down a little bit. Like I said, there is something of a personality cult around Ali, and there's a lot of excuses made for the attitudes he had and the things that he done. Let's look at the radical politics. Well, he joined the Nation of Islam, which would today be pretty much considered a black supremacist organization. Um, to what extent their Islamism was apparent, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you could really compare it to some of the organizations around today. But by any stretch of the imagination, it was a divisive, deeply controversial, and frankly racist organization. I don't think you can argue any other way. Now, the counter argument I hear when I or others make this point is, well, you need to look at the context of the time. In the 1960s and 1970s, there was vicious white racism against black people. That's absolutely true. There was. But let's not forget, and this is the real issue I have with Ali at that time. Um, let's not forget, this was not a case of the blacks versus the whites. It was more complex than that because you had a lot of white people staunchly supported the civil rights movement. In some cases, they paid with their lives, actually. Um, so when you have a divisive organization like the Nation of Islam that basically said all whites are the same, and therefore we should see them all as our enemy, that is dangerous. Now, as far as I know, Muhammad Ali has never retracted that. He's never said, I was young, I made mistakes. He's never done that. So, I could sort of forgive him if he said, well, I was young, I was angry, and I made bad choices. He's never said that. He's never retracted it, as far as I know. Now, if he has, I'll I'll be candid up front and say I was wrong. But I've never ever seen evidence that he has retracted any of that. Um, that therefore makes his position or his reputation as somehow unifying figure questionable, quite frankly, if he's never retracted those positions. Um, Also, as someone who has been in a mixed relationship, I take issue with Ali's attitude. He done an interview in, I believe it was 1973, might have been 77, with Michael Parkinson, who's a well-known British interviewer. Now, in that interview, Ali had some very blunt views about his attitude to mixed relations. And Frank, he was just outright against it. He said it's wrong. He was obviously talking specifically about white and black people, but he also mentioned Chinese people, like, i.e., if you're going to have a child, he was sort of making derogatory comments about a child who was a mixed race. Now, I don't know how anyone could rationally argue that is not a racist position to hold. I could understand if he was saying he personally preferred to be with black women. That's fine. That's his personal preference. But I have deep resentment for anybody, I don't care who they are, dictating to others who they should and shouldn't date. That's unacceptable. So why the hell should Ali somehow be above criticism that he holds that position that's somehow okay? As a white guy who's been in relationships with women from other ethnic groups, I take that personally. I think it's wrong. I think it's outright racist, and I resent it. And I don't know how anyone can make excuses for Ali's attitude. You say the context of the time. Well, by the 70s, you had, for example, the Black Panther movement. You had those radical groups, and I'm not completely ignorant to how they were set up. I understand the context. I understand they developed because they believed that Martin Luther King's approach wasn't working. I understand the context, but I still believe that their fundamental attitude was all whites are the same, and you can't condone that. You cannot try to rationalize that sort of mentality. I am very wary of any organization or movement that is fundamentally divisive and fundamentally has a lemon-ass mentality. Although I understand why those groups emerged, I still don't think that they can really be condoned historically, especially not now. And Ali has never retracted either that. That is the point. Now, from a boxing perspective, the way he treated some other boxers was frankly disgraceful. He called Joe Frazier an Uncle Tom. Now, people could say it was to hype up the fight, but when you really think about the implications about this within the black community, that is the equivalent of a white person using the M word. Within the black community, calling another black man an Uncle Tom is basically saying he's a stooge of the white establishment. And that hurt Frazier because Frazier was anything but that. And actually, Frazier came from a far more working class hard scrabble background than Ali did. Let's not forget Ali was middle class. Yes, he was a black man growing up in America at a time of racism. I'm not saying that Ali never suffered personally, he did. And there's a famous incident when he threw away his gold medal after he got in the Olympics. So I'm not saying Ali didn't personally experience racism, he absolutely did. But he then used racism against other black people, especially Joe Frazier. And in a very despicable way, in my view, he tried to turn the black community against Joe Frazier. Um, and that caused bitterness for years to come, caused by Ali, even though Frazier had offered him financial support when he had been, he had his title taken away in the late 60s for refusing the draft. How does he thank Joe Frazier? By publicly insulting him. Now, how can you respect that? He also trash talked a lot of other opponents. Again, you could argue it was just for hype. And sometimes I don't think it was particularly malicious. I think it was more sort of light-hearted. But at times Ali crossed the line and he could be outright brash, very arrogant, and he definitely popularized the whole notion of trash talking. Now, I find it interesting today that a lot of people say, oh, look at Mayweather, look how arrogant he is, especially Pacquiao fans, myself included. And yet, when Mayweather says he's greater than Ali, people are like, whoa, he's offended God. Essentially, that's the sort of mentality that comes across. But my question is, what is the real difference between Mayweather and Ali? I'm not talking about as fighters, I'm talking about in terms of their attitude. Both men more or less have the same style. Ali said he was the greatest ever whilst Joe Louis was still alive. So what's the difference, really, when you think about it? Um, the main issue I have with the whole Muhammad Ali thing is this absurd idea that he is above criticism. And anyone who does criticize him is ignorant or racist somehow. I don't know how that comes about, especially when there's many black fighters I have huge respect for. So I don't know how you could argue that that's a point of contention. I just don't see where that comes from. Um, Basically, I'm just tired of the personality cult around Muhammad Ali. And this is not to downplay his legacy. I do think he's an outstanding, exceptional fighter. I probably wouldn't put him at the very top. I'd probably put Sugar Ray Robinson there, although that's something I'd still to really analyze. I'd put Ali easily in the top five, So I'm not downplaying his significance as a fighter, not at all. I think he's a great, great fighter, but I don't think as a human being he is the Messiah, as some people make him out to be. I don't think he's should be in a bubble whereby he shouldn't be criticized. And I don't think every time another fighter, especially contemporary fighters, say anything against him, people round on that fighter and say, "Whoa, how dare you say that?" Whether it be Mayweather or Carl Froch said he wasn't particularly a fan of Ali. It's almost like an expectation if you're a boxer or a trainer or anyone basically interested in the boxing world or a fan, you have to love Muhammad Ali, and it just pisses me off. Nathan Hayes isn't subservient to anyone. I don't pretend to be a fan of someone just because it's a popular thing to do. And frankly, I don't think Ali deserves the sheer level of hysterical fandom that he gets. I can understand that he's an inspiring figure. I do understand that. And I accept that he is very important culturally speaking. I accept as a fighter he's exceptional. I accept all those things. But those who say that Ali is somehow above critique really need to think about what they're saying because no fighter is above critique. No fighter. You cannot say that any fighter, either as a fighter or a human being, is perfect. Now, I'm a big Manny Pacquiao fan, okay? But I'm not going to say that Pacquiao is above criticism. He had his moments. He was a bit of a womanizer, and I don't entirely appreciate his attitude with the outcome of this Mayweather Pacquiao fight. I do think he's uncharacteristically not being very humble. But I still have enormous respect for Pacquiao as a fighter and a human being. So my point with this is, it's one thing supporting a fighter and being inspired by a fighter, but it's quite another taking this attitude that that fighter is somehow above all critique. And I don't want to hear comments like, "Oh, who are you? You're nobody. He's great." This sort of thing. I'm not comparing myself to Ali. Okay, of course he would flatten me. Of course he would lay me out. I get that. I'm rather taking on this conception that he is somehow above critique. And yes, I'm aware of the situation that he's now in. So it's not meant to be tasteless. It's not meant to be, I wish him all the best. It's not like a sort of, I'm not trying to be crude about this. So it's not so much an attack against Ali directly. It's more criticizing those who somehow put him on this platform of you can't question him. Ali started a lot of things in boxing that could be considered negative. For example, trash talking. Now, on the other hand, a positive thing was the big, big fights that he was involved in. But he wasn't the only one that made those fights. It was also his opponents. And whether we like it or not, Don King. Um, but the sort of disrespect Ali showed to most of his opponents was, you could say it was light-hearted and it was to hype up the fights, but it could also be argued that popularized the same sort of attitude for a lot of fighters to come. And we've seen it with a lot of guys since then. So, and the interesting thing is when it comes from other fighters, people say, "Oh, that fighter is arrogant." But when Ali done it, no one sort of seemed to care that much, or at least they don't now. So, in 20 or 30 years, are people going to be saying Floyd Mayweather wasn't appreciated in his own day? I think it's possible that will be the case. Um, and you know what? So what if Floyd Mayweather says he's greater than Ali? Maybe he's not. maybe history will show that that was not accurate. But for a great fighter to say that he's great, I don't think it's particularly controversial or unusual. Mayweather is arrogant, but in some ways he's earned himself a right to be arrogant because he is a great fighter. I mean, we can't pretend otherwise. Floyd Mayweather is an all-time great fighter. He's not. I don't think he's the greatest ever, but I think, especially after his win the other night, I think he will rank a lot higher than people are currently speculating. And I'm not a fan of Floyd Mayweather. I don't particularly like his personality. I can't stand the way he flaunts his money around. Um, but sometimes we have to take away the personal and simply focus on someone's skill as a fighter. So in conclusion, as a fighter, Ali was exceptional. As a human being, he was extraordinary, inspiring. But was he this great benevolent people figure that people make him out to be? I don't think so. Yes, he's done some things since then. I know he's done a lot of charity work. I know he's done a lot for the boxing world, and I acknowledge that. So I'm not sort of vilifying him. I'm just saying that the sheer level of hysterical adulation is, in my view, not good. I don't think it's healthy, and I don't give a shit if people want to insult me or say I'm full of crap or whatever. I'm simply being honest here with my views, and I don't believe that every boxing fan slavishly have to say the same thing, that they love Muhammad Ali. I don't. I think some of his views were frankly ridiculous, and a lot of the time he came across as quite just brash and frankly irritating. He was a great fighter, no question about it, and an iconic figure. And at his peak, he was the most recognized face on the planet Earth. So I'm not taking anything away from him in terms of the influence he did have. I'm just saying that people shouldn't be so blindly adulating of one individual because that borders on a personality cult, and it is really no different from what you see in totalitarian states. Let's just get real here, and it's just, if you disagree with me, 100% fine. But I would ask, at least respect my right to have an opinion that isn't the same as yours. Thanks for watching.